Hello, everyone. This will be phase 6 of What If the MCU Still Had All the Rights to Their Characters. Now, without any further delays, let's begin. The kicking off this phase will be X-Men Apocalypse. We open up to what appears to be a war-torn world where we would see immeasurable amounts of destruction and damage, and the camera would slowly shift into a person wearing a mysterious hood traversing throughout the damaged ruins as he appears to be running from someone. We would only see the columns of fire as the person still traverses through the ruined land before a sudden explosion would catch the person off guard and he would be knocked back, landing on the ground. The person would slowly look up to see his attacker, only to find a man in what presumes to be in a godlike position, raising his hands to either side of his body, as if he were a biblical figure. I finally found you. The man on the ground would rip off his hood, revealing what seems to be a cybernetic appearance where he's wielding a metal arm as well as a giant machine gun as he blasts at the man above him, but the man above would simply wave his hands, divert the blast into another direction, sending a shock wave. The man above would snarl before his eyes would light up and he would laser at the mechanical man below him as the screen would cut to black. The camera would shift into what we would see as the X Mansion, where we would see Hank McCoy giving a lesson on biology to his students, most of whom aren't really paying attention. After the lesson, Hank would be confronted by Cyclops, and he notices that Scott has an unusual happy expression on his face. Hank would ask him what's up, and Scott would say that Logan is back from Japan. So both him and Cyclops would head to the professor's office, where they would see Logan and the professor deep in a conversation before both of them would turn into the two that entered the room. Logan would state he was planning on staying in Japan for way longer, but he has heard of Hulk's recent attack, and thus he decided to come back to America for some damage control. Cyclops would ask the professor if Storm has decided to come back as well, but the professor would simply nod his head, stating that Storm is still in Wakanda with her newly engaged husband. And so each of them would be engrossed in conversation, but that would be until they hear a large crash outside of the X-Mansion. So assuming this is attack, the X-Men would suit up and head outside to find a large crater on their lawn, and they would slowly approach the crater as they would find the same mysterious man that we saw in the beginning of the movie lying down, gravely injured. Confused, the X-Men would approach this figure and they would take them into their medical room where they would have examinations on him as well as nurse him back to health. So hours later, the man would wake up and the first thing he would see is the face of Scott Summers, and he would look into him for a few seconds before finally looking away, seeing the faces of the other remaining X-Men close to his hospital bed: Logan, Hank, Professor X, as well as Emma Frost. Professor X would start to interrogate the man, asking him where he hails from. This would be where the man would explain his origin, and he would have a couple glances at Cyclops, which don't go unnoticed by Xavier. And he explains that he comes from the future, where a powerful mutant known as Apocalypse has destroyed his world, along with his four horsemen. And with Apocalypse's overwhelming strength, he managed to not only defeat the X-Men, but the Avengers as well as the Fantastic Four, as well as any other hero who dared to stand in his way. He himself is part of a resistance that's still fighting against Apocalypse and his horsemen. The man would also reveal his name to be Cable, and he gives more exposition on Apocalypse's power, and that he is also a mutant. Cable would also hesitate for a second before stating that he is also the son of Scott Summers and Jean Grey, which would leave everyone in the room in shock. Cyclops at first wouldn't believe this, but Emma would assure him that She has thoroughly searched through Cable's mind, and he is telling the truth. Xavier would further back Emma Frost on this, and Cyclops would be completely baffled, especially since Jean is dead. But Cable would say that the universe is filled with infinite possibilities, and thus there might be another universe where his mother is alive, which would even further leave Cyclops in a state of absolute confusion. But Xavier, after hearing Cable's tragedy, would offer to have the X-Men help him in his time of need, where they would go in the future with Cable in order to battle against this supposed being. But Logan would interrupt the conversation, stating how he doesn't even trust Cable, and how the hell did he even manage to get to the past in the first place, much less ends up in the X-Mansion. Pretty convenient, don't you think? Cable would lift up his hand, revealing a wrist bracelet, in which he tells them that it's a time travel device created by the Shi'ar Empire. And it also allows him to travel to a specific location in time as well, in which he chose the X-Mansion in this specific time period, as he knows that this would be the period that heroes would be at their peak. Beast would give the idea that the Avengers could come along with them as well, but Cable says that only a limited number of people can travel with him, as the time travel device has an occupancy limit. And Xavier would further add on that the Avengers already have their hands full with the aftermath of the Hulk's devastating rampage, and dropping this onto their lap would just be a further disservice to them. Plus, he has full confidence that the X-Men will be able to handle this threat. And so, a couple of hours would pass, and after Cable is fully recovered, he, along with the entirety of the X-Men, would be sent into the future using Cable's time-traveling device on his wrist, and they would appear in the war-torn world where Cable resides from. Iceman would remark that this feels like the plot of a Terminator movie, which would result in Rogue slapping him upside the head. Emma Frost would use her powers in order to sense if there's any life nearby, which she would sense a faint sense that is not too far from them, and the X-Men would diverge to that location, where they would be confronted by one of the four Horsemen, who soars above the X-Men and lands in front of them with a loud crack. Each and every member of the team would be in shock, as what appears to stand in front of them would be Angel, but instead, and the Horseman would only look at the X-Men before chuckling, putting his hand on his face to continue his laughter. Now, isn't this something? Poor little Summers has brought company, and it appears to be old friends. Warren, what happened to you? What does it look like, Cyclops? I've simply been... Angel would spread out his wings, revealing sheets of metal. Reborn. With a sadistic smile, the Archangel would swipe his left wing, using the blades as projectiles as they would dart towards the X-Men, who would either block or dodge out of the way, igniting the first fight between the first Horsemen of Apocalypse. Iceman would attempt to freeze the Archangel in place, but the Angel would simply fly up and strike down at Iceman with more of his blades, who would dodge each of them, creating an ice barrier, and the Archangel would simply rain down blades from above. And Cyclops would try to shoot him down using his optic blast, but the Archangel would simply bob and weave out of the way of the attacks. But he would be unaware that another member of the X-Men can also fly, Rogue, as she would dash up to the Archangel and engage in a fierce battle. But the winged menace would simply smack her down back into the ground, creating a large crater. Cable would approach her, and it would appear as if she's been stabbed by one of the blades, which greatly worries him. Nightcrawler would try to teleport into Archangel's view, but he wouldn't be able to get enough of a good grasp, as the Archangel would simply fly away from his attacks. But Wolverine would come up with a plan, as he would look at Colossus, and Colossus would look back at him, seemingly knowing what Wolverine already has in mind. They just need a distraction for it to work. Gambit would oblige, as he would strike cards at Archangel, who would continue to dodge, but the cards would be too much as Archangel would continue to bob and weave, causing a momentary distraction for Wolverine to curl up into a ball, and Colossus would lift him up into the air before throwing him to the direction of Archangel. Wolverine would extend his body and strike out his claws, which would connect at Archangel's torso, and both of them would come crashing into the ground. Wolverine would still be impaling Archangel with his claws, and Archangel surprisingly would still be laughing, before Wolverine would retract his claws and knock him out with a straight punch. This would be a momentary victory, however, as Cable would be holding Rogue, revealing that the Archangel's blades might have been poisonous and that Rogue needs medical attention immediately. But he would then be cut off by more of the Horsemen arriving, as well as a peculiar figure, the same one in which we saw at the beginning of the movie. This would be revealed as Apocalypse, who simply says, "You have evaded me once, Nathaniel Summers. That is a mistake I will not repeat." And Apocalypse would then look at the other members of the X-Men, and this would create a small smile on his face as he is reveling in the fact that he has more mutants to control. The other three Horsemen of the Apocalypse would also be revealed, where we would see the three figures standing behind Apocalypse. Pyramid X, which appears to be an altered blue version of Storm. Wolverine, but this one seems more matted and appears to have a metal gauntlet in place of where his hand should be. But the figure that surprises the X-Men the most would be Mr. Sinister, who revels in the fact that his mortal enemies are standing right in front of him. "Hello again, Summers." "Essex, how is this possible?" "Oh, come now, Summers. I thought this reunion would be grand for you." "Now you are finally seeing what I have been building up towards all of this time." This is what Mr. Sinister has been planning ever since the offense of X-Men United, where he managed to get enough blood samples from mutants as well as enough of a power source to finally revive the first ever mutant, Apocalypse. But using the stolen Shi'ar technology, he time-traveled into Cable's timeline, where Apocalypse managed to lay waste to the Earth's heroes, as well as create an army of horsemen under his command. The same time-traveling device that Cable has on his wrist right now, as he purposely had Cable find it in order to have him be desperate enough to go back in time and search for help, and this is where the opportunity would land for him to finally dispose of his enemies. And now you witness divinity itself, and soon there will come forth a new age of mutants, where Apocalypse will only choose the strong to survive, the weak to perish. It will be a new dynasty. "You psychotic bastard," Cable says as he aims his gun at Mr. Sinister and fires at him, but the blast is redirected when Apocalypse would swipe away his hands once again, and the blast would be redirected into another direction. "Enough talk. You all are to become my horsemen, or die under my foot." Gambit would be clutching Rogue in his arms, who is still injured. "She needs medical help now." I can't do that voice. "She needs medical help now." Cable would look at Rogue and then back at the enemies in front of them, and with a press of the button on his time travel device, each of the X-Men, along with Archangel, would be transported back into the past, before Apocalypse can do any further harm to them. Now back at the X-Mansion, Rogue would be hospitalized as the rest of the X-Men would try to figure out a strategy in order to beat Apocalypse and his Horsemen. Emma Frost would be interrogating Archangel, trying to search into his mind for anything relevant that could lead into the downfall of Apocalypse. And we would see Cable on the balcony of the X-Mansion, staring towards the horizon. and he appears to have a longing gaze that would be until Cyclops would be beside him. Something on your mind? It's just, I never knew a sunset could look so beautiful. You know, I'm sure it's no secret by now, but I didn't have the best life growing up. When I was young, I had to grow up without you or my mother. All I knew was battle, and Cable would turn away, and Cyclops would put a hand on his shoulder. We'll help you by any means necessary. That's a promise. Both Cyclops and Cable would embrace in a hug. And it would admittedly be pretty awkward, as Cable would not be the type of guy to show any type of affection. A couple of hours would pass, and Rogue would finally be nursed back to full health, and the X-Men would return to Cable's future in order to stop Apocalypse, but now they are bringing along Professor X as a means to further debilitate Apocalypse's abilities, and so the heroes would confront Apocalypse as well as his Horsemen, which would enact a final battle that would decide not only the fate of Cable's world, but the fate of each universe as well. Xavier would enter in a telepathic battle between Apocalypse, where both of them are having a mental battle, whilst Wolverine and Kitty Pryde are dealing with the Horseman Wolverine, also known as the war counterpart of the Horsemen. Cyclops and Cable would battle Mr. Sinister, who is seen as the pestilence counterpart of the Horsemen, and the rest of the X-Men would endure Pyramid X, also known as Famine. It would be a longing battle that would be until Cyclops and Cable managed to get the upper hand on Mr. Sinister and finish off the villain once and for all with a combined effort of Cyclops' optic blast as well as Cable's telekinetic manipulation. The X-Men also managed to do in Pyramid X and the alternate Wolverine, which would lead into the final standoff between Apocalypse and the X-Men. And it would be a fierce battle, but Apocalypse is eventually overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and is forced to retreat for now. Xavier tries to track his location via his mind link, but is unable to due to Apocalypse's telepathic prowess, as if he is blocking Xavier's mind from reaching him. And so, the X-Men would eventually return back to their own timeline, with Cable thanking them for their help, as well as him promising that he will find Apocalypse and end him for good. But before Cable returns to his future, Xavier would question him on where he found his time-traveling device, in which he remembers Mr. Sinister mentioning something about the Shi'ar technology, as he doesn't know why, but he feels a strange familiarity with that name. Cable would say that before Sinister died, he mentioned that he stole the technology from a humanoid woman, which greatly interests Xavier, and so Cable would return back to his world, looking forward for once to a bright future ahead. The next MCU project will be Squirrel Girl, and this will basically be a short 6-episode series featuring the misadventures of Squirrel Girl. And the villain I'd have for this show would be Mole Man, played by Danny DeVito, if possible. The movie following will be The Amazing Spider-Man 6. And this movie will essentially be capping off the second trilogy of Spider-Man's story, where he has now graduated from Empire State University and is currently looking for a job as the Daily Bugle barely pays him. But unbeknownst to him, Peter Parker now has two enemies that are after him, Eddie Brock and Harry Osborn. Harry still doesn't know that Peter is Spider-Man, but he still blames Spider-Man for all of the problems in his life, that being his father, as well as the reason his company is going downhill. So, Harry would now be powered up by the Goblin formula, and the first thing he sets out to do would be to kill Spider-Man. Meanwhile, we would see Spider-Man swing throughout the streets of New York before landing on a rooftop and pulling out an engagement ring, as he appears to be rehearsing what he will say to Mary Jane, as both of them have been dating for over 3 years now, and he feels that it's finally time for them to actually get married. But before Peter could figure out what he's gonna say, his spider senses would go off, and as if on cue, he would see a building explode right from his very eyes, as many casualties would erupt, and mass panic would ensue. Spider-Man would quickly swing to the area, where he tries to get as many people away from the fire as he can, with the assistance of the New York Fire Department. But one of them would reveal that one lady is still stuck on the eighth floor, so Spider-Man would swing back to the burning building, trying to find the lady that is still trapped, which he eventually would, and he would slowly approach the lady, trying to get her to come with him. That would be until his spider sense would go off, and the old lady's disguise would be unraveled to reveal Green Goblin, who quickly punches Spider-Man across the cheek. Spider-Man would be surprised before the Green Goblin would follow up by kicking him in the torso. This would lead into a battle between both Spider-Man and Green Goblin. Spider-Man is confused as Norman is still in the raft, so he is unaware of who this new Green Goblin may be. The fight would escape the building as both Spider-Man and Green Goblin would battle all throughout New York. And Spider-Man appears to be getting the upper hand. We would see him start to beat down the Green Goblin. Green Goblin, seeing how unprepared he was, tries to fly away, but Spider-Man would chase him down. But unbeknownst to Spider-Man, his web would snap, causing him to plummet down into the ground. And since he was almost at a skyscraper level, his fall would be brutal. Spider-Man tries to save himself by clinging his web onto another surface, but each time he would, his web would mysteriously snap. Spider-Man would panic as he is rapidly approaching the ground. And he knows that the Green Goblin isn't doing this as he sees him flying away. And so, Spider-Man would prepare himself before ultimately crashing into the concrete, creating a massive crater. Spider-Man wouldn't be too injured, but he would still sustain a lot of damage. And as he's in the crater, he would think to himself, what the hell happened? As in the distance, we would see a mysterious figure peering over from a skyscraper, watching the webbed hero on the ground as he would slowly cackle to himself before swinging away into the night. We would cut to Peter and MJ in their apartment. We would see MJ patching up Peter's injuries, as she would also scold him for being reckless. Peter would say that it wasn't his fault before he would glance down in his pocket, still clutching the ring, and with a heavy sigh, he holds MJ's hand and he would reveal the ring that he's been hiding. And this is where we would hear Peter start to stutter as if he were back in high school, where he would stammer over his words before murmuring out if Mary Jane would marry him. We would start to see Mary Jane form tears in her eyes as she would cry out a happy yes before embracing Peter in a kiss. And it would be a tender moment. And what would follow is we would fast forward to a couple days later, where we would see the wedding of Peter and Mary Jane Parker. Aunt May would be the bridesmaid, while Johnny Storm is Peter's best man. And we would also see the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, the X-Men, as well as the Daily Bugle staff in the crowd as well. And Peter would mention that he once had a Stark internship, and that is how he met the Avengers and the rest of the heroes, as ordered to make it less suspicious on why all of these superheroes are attending this one guy's wedding. Peter would notice that Harry wasn't in the crowd, as he originally intended on having him be his best man, but he tried to call Harry several times, but he would never pick up the phone. But then again, with all of the recent events of Oscorp suffering a decline, as well as the incarceration of Norman Osborn, he understands why Harry might be trying to close everyone off, which makes Peter a bit sad, but he decides that it's best if his best friend was given some space. Meanwhile, we would cut to Harry Osborn in his lab, tending to the wounds that he sustained from his battle with Spider-Man, until he would hear a strange noise and he would turn around thinking that Spider-Man has found him, but what would reveal itself would not be the web slinger, but instead it would look as if it was something from a nightmare. Standing in front of Harry Osborn would be the full form of Venom. Harry would jump back in surprise. What the hell are you? The symbiote would partly reveal parts of Eddie's face. We are Venom. We saw your fight with Spider-Man, and you nearly would have been beaten if not for us. So Harry would look in surprise, but then that would later turn into apprehension before he would finally say, what would you have in mind? Venom would grab Harry by the shoulder. Holy shit, I need water. The heart Osborn. First, you must attack his heart. We would cut to Aunt May's house. We would see the sweet lady looking at a framed photo of her, Ben, and Peter, seemingly in a happy time. She would sigh when she looked at the photo, still being a sign that she misses her husband dearly. That would be until she hears a knock at the door, and she would find it strange that someone would knock at this hour. She would look through the glass, but seeing no one there, she decides to open the door, and it would appear that no one was at the door. That would be until a trail of saliva would appear from above her, and she would look up to see the horrifying face of Venom. We would cut to Peter Parker and Mary Jane barging into the hospital where he had received a call that his aunt was hospitalized. Peter would desperately grab a doctor, demanding him to tell him where his aunt is. The doctor would tell Peter the room, and him and Mary Jane would dash off towards that direction, and he would open the door to find Aunt May barely clinging on to life. Peter would clutch his aunt's hand. Peter would ask the doctor what happened, and the doctor would reveal that a neighbor was walking by, and he saw May unconscious at her front porch, seemingly lying in a pool of her own blood. The doctor would also hand Peter a note that was left at the scene. Peter would open the note, to which it would say, "If you wish to find us, we are at the night for which everything changed." The doctor would be confused, asking Peter what it meant, but Peter would recognize instantly that this was the act of the symbiote, and it appears that it has taken another host. So Peter, without muttering another word, would run out of the hospital bed and jump out of a window, making sure no one was looking, and put on his suit to swing towards the night where he got rid of the symbiote, in the church. Peter would arrive at the church, and it would appear to be seemingly empty, but it would have the occasional cracks and creaks that an old building would usually have, and he would look around, searching for whoever caused his aunt to be in the hospital. That would be until his spider sense would go off, and a pumpkin bomb would appear in his area, in which Spider-Man would quickly dodge, but the explosion would cause him to be flung back into a wall, where he would crash and land on the ground. Spider-Man would look up to see Harry Osborn, to which the two would have an altercation, in which Spider-Man would seemingly get the upper hand again. That would be until before he could punch Harry, a black fist would grab his hand before he could do a blow, and he would look up to see the horrifying face of the symbiote, to which Venom would respond by swiftly punching Spider-Man across the face, sending him flying through a wall. Spider-Man would be on the ground while the Venom would seemingly approach him before engaging in another battle, now between both Venom and Green Goblin. It would be the night that will settle each of their feuds. But the pair would be too much of a match for Spidey, as Venom would appear to be strangling him using his black webs, and telling Harry to strike him now. Before Harry does, he rips off Spider-Man's mask to see his face, and what would surprise him would be that it would be the face of his best friend, Peter Parker. This would cause Harry immeasurable amounts of confusion, and he would be distracted long enough for Spider-Man to break free and punch Venom across the face, sending him flying. Before Peter could do the same to Harry, Harry would also reveal his face, revealing Harry Osborn, which would also leave Peter in shock. Harry, now seeing that the man he has hated for so long was actually his best friend, would start to have his motivations be changed, and he would look back towards Venom, who would seemingly lunge at Peter, but Harry would quickly get in the way, and Venom would slash his body, critically injuring Harry. This would cause another battle between both Spider-Man and Venom. But Peter, noticing the symbiote's weakness was the church bell, as from last time, he would quickly swing up with Venom on his tail, in which Peter would swiftly punch the bell, which would send out vibrations, which would quickly weaken the symbiote enough for it to detach from Eddie, in which Peter would see the real face of Eddie Brock. He would simply be in shock, as this night was full of immeasurable surprises. But Peter, using his quick thinking, would quickly whip one of Harry's goblin bombs and throw it at the symbiote, seemingly destroying it. Peter would swing back towards Harry's location, in which he is seen lying in a pool of his own blood, and with one last breath, Harry would look at Peter's face and tell him that he's sorry, before his eyes would close. We would cut to a few days later, where Aunt May is seemingly getting better, and Mary Jane is beside her in her hospital bed. Aunt May would ask where Peter is, and Mary Jane says he has a new job as a school teacher at Brooklyn Visions Academy. Aunt May would smile, happy that Peter has finally found something that he could enjoy in the academy, giving his students a lecture about the basics of biology that would be until one particular student would barge through the door. "Sorry I'm late, Mr. Parker. Something really weird happened." Peter would give the student a warm smile. "It's no problem. You can just go ahead and take a seat, Mr. Morales, sir. Miles Morales." The next project will be Moon Knight, Season 1. And I'd have this be more of a rated R show, and it would be much longer than it was in the original. So about 18 episodes. And I would also have Jake Lockley be featured in Season 1 as well. But besides that, those are really all the things I would change. The next movie will be The Thunderbolts. And this would be the roster that I have in mind, as the villain for this film would be Doctor Doom. And the plot will essentially be a diplomatic disagreement between both the United States and Latveria, to which the government would send the team comprised of the Thunderbolts to deal with the issue, as a way to persuade Doom to agree to their deal, which would go as bad as well as you would expect. But this film would be used to showcase not only Doctor Doom's power, but also the corruption of the United States government. But the movie would end with both the US and Latveria coming to a compromise in which both parties are satisfied. Now, the next movie will be Deadpool 2. And this will essentially have a similar plot to the original Deadpool 2. And I would also have Cable and Domino still be featured in this movie, along with the first appearance of Psylocke. And this will essentially be an unofficial version of X-Force, where we would see Deadpool wear his trademark gray and red costume that he had in the comics. And the villain I'm thinking of for this movie will be Omega Red, as I find his powers to be pretty cool, and I find it a shame that he wasn't really in any of the Fox X-Men films, so he'll be featured as a main antagonist in this one. Now, the project after this movie will be Cloak and Dagger, Season 1. And honestly, this would essentially be the same show as it was in the real world. Nothing would really change, except I'd have more references to the greater Marvel universe. But besides that, this would roughly stay the same. But I guess it would have different actors, since this show would come out over a decade after the original show actually came out. But besides that, the plot would roughly stay the same. Now, the movie following will be Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. And not gonna lie, I'm gonna have to do a bit of retconning. So by the end of Iron Man 3, Shang-Chi would have already been 7 years old, along with his sister. And if we look at the timelines, Iron Man 3 takes place in December of 2012. And this movie would take place in about 9 years after that. So about 2021, chronologically. So if we do the math, that'll make Shang-Chi around 16 to 17 in this movie. So much younger than he was in the actual movie. And this would be when his mother, who would be much more of a villain in this universe, will send him out to enact his revenge for his father and to kill Tony Stark. So that would of course have Iron Man be in this movie as well. But throughout the film, we would see Shang-Chi start to have second thoughts about killing another man, especially for someone he didn't really know all that well. And the main villain I'd have for this movie would be Shang-Chi's mother. And Fin Fang Foom would also make an appearance in this movie as well, but he'll be more of a companion for Shang-Chi. And this movie would still explore the legends of the Ten Rings, and we would actually see Shang-Chi possess them. And we would see him use them against his fight with Iron Man. But Iron Man, with much more experience, would be able to defeat the young Shang-Chi, in which you would actually sympathize with the young boy, seeing as how he was carved out a path that he never intended to take. And so, with the help of Iron Man and Fin Fang Foom, they would rescue his sister from his mother's clutches, as well as defeat his mother once and for all, setting him free from his predetermined destiny. And now, the movie following will be Ghost Rider and the Spirit of Vengeance. This would, of course, be a sequel to the first movie, with the main villain being Blackheart. And in this film, we would see even more of the magical side of the Marvel Universe, as well as having a grander scope of Ghost Rider's abilities. We would see both Johnny Blaze and Robbie Reyes battling against the nefarious Blackheart, and it would be a hard-fought fight before the two Ghost Riders would eventually be able to overcome the villain. And I would also have Thanos make a cameo in this movie as well, just to build up more hype surrounding the Infinity Gauntlet movie, as well as the saga as a whole.